and welcome to the conclusion of An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, our story of the week. Today, in this video, we're going to be looking at activity 1.14, Bierce and the Language of Sensation. So imagery, if we define the word imagery as a literary term, is language that appeals to the five senses, things that we can imagine hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and smelling. And so we're going to look at those details in the last part of the story. To keep this video within a manageable time frame, I'm not going to read the whole section to you. If you are interested in having the whole section read, you can visit the Storytime video, which is posted in the Google Classroom, where I read all three parts together. So in this activity, we are going to identify sensory details, so imagery, that give insights into the main character's state of mind. We're also going to analyze how different language choices, so the words and figurative language and literal language that the author chooses, and how they shift the tone of a text. Lastly, we're going to go back to your predictions that you've made at part 1 and part 2 and correct them, or see if they were right and confirm them. So either confirming or correcting predictions. So in this activity, you will read the conclusion of An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I will read a little bit of it and model some annotation. And then in our live sessions, we're going to talk about the story's themes. So theme being the overall message that an author wants to communicate to a reader. So we'll talk more about theme, but really in thinking about parts 1, 2, and 3 together, what we really want to do is conclude what was it that the author was trying to get across to us? Why did he tell us this story about this man? All right, so as we read, we are going to underline some of that text that is descriptive language of what Farquhar sees, feels, and hears. So those three senses and the imagery that he uses to communicate them. Now, by using imagery, sensory description, we tap into, as authors and readers, shared experiences. So, for the most part, most of us have some hearing, we have a sense of touch, we have a sense of smell, and most of us have some sense of light, or seeing, whether it's just light or darkness, but most of us have full sight. And then, of course, hearing and the sounds that we're able to hear, whether they're small sounds or large sounds. So these things are common experiences and can bring the understanding together and help us understand what someone is experiencing by shared experiences, through shared experiences. Okay, again, the language in this is complex, and you may need to look at some of the vocabulary as we go through. Remember that you can click on words and ask Springboard to define it for you, and then come back after it's underlined and read the definition. So if you need to know what the words mean, there is that ability, or you can go ahead and use a dictionary. Okay, so there is no opening writing prompt. So basically, it asks us to go ahead and do the reading looking for these instances of imagery. So sensory description, seeing, feeling, and hearing. So I am going to go through the first paragraph, and then you can go through the remaining paragraphs on your own. So I'm starting here. This paragraph is kind of rough, but because it's very descriptive and graphic. So it says he's awakened. Oh, here's one: pain of a sharp pressure upon his throat. So I'm going to underline that as a sense of feeling. Okay. I don't know why it sometimes takes me twice to be able to do this. Let's try this again. There we go. A sense of suffocation, so the feeling that he cannot breathe, that tightness in the chest. Shooting, so agonies, meaning pain, shooting from his neck down through his body and limbs. So if you've ever experienced shooting pains that radiate through your body parts, pains flashing, right? So pains that appear to flash. I'm going to underline that. So a lot of pain he's experiencing here as he drops from his place on the bridge. Let's see. Beating with an inconceivably rapid, so his heart is beating very fast. So I'm going to mark the heartbeat. He feels his heart beating. Let's see, pulsating fire heating him. There's a sense for you. He's feeling very hot. His head, a fullness of congestion in his head. Maybe you have felt that if you've had a really bad headache, or if you've had a bad cold or sinus infection, that feeling like your face is almost swollen and everything is pressing from the inside out. All right, so no thinking. Says he's not thinking. Let's see. Ineffectual nature, intellectual part of his nature was effaced. Let's see, feeling was torment. So I'm going to underline that. So there's a lot of physical feeling here. Now we have a little bit of sense of motion around him. He is envisioning that he's like got this cloud around him. So maybe that's sight. He's swinging like a pendulum, but he's not seeing that. Let's see. Light. So he sees the light shoot upward. That's sight. And then he hears the noise of a loud splash. So hearing, that's another, and roaring. A frightful roaring was in his ears. Here's some more sensory. So feeling and seeing. Cold and dark. We'll underline those. The rope had broken. No additional strangulation. The noose about his neck kept the water from his lungs. Okay, so I have gone through and underlined some of the imagery in paragraph 1. There is much more imagery to come. And so as you read, it would behoove you to stop after every paragraph or every chunk and underline those passages where you see sight, touch, or sound, right? Okay, let's go ahead and scroll down to the questions, because these are the questions that you will answer and that we will discuss in our live session. Under making observations, what settings does the character visit? So as he sees and hears and senses the setting change as he's moving down this river, I want you to identify the different places that he visits. In what ways does his state of mind change over the course of this part? Okay, so he goes from feeling one thing to, or thinking one thing and feeling, and to feeling and thinking another, to feeling and thinking, and maybe coming to a realization at the end. And then what is pushing him to keep trying to survive? So think about, is it something that's happening around him? Is it something that he is trying to achieve? Is it a place where he's trying to go? What is it that's keeping him alive? Now, under working from the text, this is kind of new in our Springboard Digital. So I just want to show you how this works a little bit. So it says, go back to the sensory descriptions that you underlined. Very important that you do that so that this task is easier. Okay. And copy, so you can just copy paste in the digital book. If you're doing it in your paper book, you'll need to write examples of what he feels, sees, and hears. So what we're doing now is we're categorizing these details. We are putting them into the appropriate category. So in other words, I underlined up in the top, I'm going to go up here to the first paragraph, the pain of sharp pressure upon his throat. So that is something, and I'm going to use my Control-C to copy that. Hopefully it's working. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to use my Control-V, there we go, to copy that in. So here is my first piece of copied evidence. Now I'm going to need to go back up and I'm going to find other pieces of evidence about what he sees and what he hears. Now, you should be able to come up with numerous responses. So there are, in my book, probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the first column alone, more in the middle of what he sees. So if you could come up with even half of that, 5 for each column, then you will be doing very well. Okay, so look at the second. Okay, yes, I have to click out of that. And notice how I no longer have to click save, it just stays there. Okay, and then if you want to add to it, you just go back in and you can hit your enter button and add more. Number 2 says contrast the final 2 sentences from the story. So here they are. As he is about to clasp her, he feels a stunning blow upon the back of the neck. A blinding white light blazes all about him with a sound like the shock of a cannon. Then all is darkness and silence. Verses. Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body, with a broken neck, swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of the Owl Creek Bridge. Now, what it wants you to do is write a sentence beginning with the word while to tell about the word choice and sensory details in the penultimate, meaning the almost last sentence, that differ from those in the final sentence. Okay, so in fact, let's go ahead and see if it'll define penultimate for us. Let's look. Next to last, of or relating to the penult of a word. Okay, so the next to last sentence versus the last sentence. It's about tone. I'm just going to tell you right now. It's about feeling and what feeling the author wants to leave the reader with. Think about what is the feeling of that first sentence and what are the things that draw my attention there. And then what is the sense of the last sentence, that feeling, the tone, and what is it that the author really intends for us to feel at the end. Okay, so while, and we're going to start with that, while he says this, this, and this, then we're going to go on to the next sentence. So for example, while in the penultimate sentence, the author points out blank and blank, in the final sentence, he leaves the reader feeling blank and blank when he says blank and blank. So something like that. So I'll put a little example in here for you. Perhaps while the author, I don't need that quote, do I? Okay, so while the penultimate sentence uses words such as clasp her and blinding white light to give a sense of, I don't know what it's going to be. I'm just going to leave blanks here. The final sentence is more direct and focuses less on the characters. I'm just going to say this, out of body experience and more on the physical end of his life. That's just, I'm going to leave it at that. It's not perfect. Oh, goodness, I have my annotations on. It's not perfect, but it is something. Okay, I would go back and revise that if I had time. All right, lastly, what he wants you to do, or what Springboard wants you to do, is think about the perspective. So what perspective is it that we are looking at the story from in part 1? Now, this is a third-person narrative where we have a narrator who's not using I, me, or my. We're seeing it from the outside. And yet, we are still seeing from his perspective. Now, are we looking at it from him in fear, or from him in a dreamland, or him in a memory? So think about what perspective. towards what is he looking? Is he looking towards the past, the future, the present? Is he in the moment of pain? Or is he experiencing some kind of out of body? So this is what it means by perspective here. Okay. And then think about the difference of perspective in those two last sentences. All right. Here are the questions that we will discuss in our live session. How would the story be different if it ended with all is darkness and silence? So that penultimate sentence. This one's very interesting. I can't wait to hear your comments on this one. Did Farquhar achieve his goal of living the larger life of a soldier by attempting to destroy the bridge in order to thwart the Union forces? And then revisit the essential question about telling details. Which details in the story did you find most telling when trying to understand Farquhar and his situation? So the essential question that they are referring to is this: how do telling details work together to convey meaning? So, which details from all the three different parts come together to help you understand this scenario, this whole situation that he has found himself in? All right, and then lastly, in our last live session this week, this is how we will end, is with the check your understanding. Thinking about the prediction that you made way back before part 1 last week, how did the perspective shifts affect the accuracy of your prediction? So did the fact that his perspective shifted from one tone to another, where he was feeling one thing and then another thing, and then at times he was hopeful and at times he was not, did these perspective changes change the accuracy of the prediction as we went along? All right, so that is all for today, and this is the last video for this week. If you just want to hear the story read, that's in Storytime in the Google Classroom, and I will see you in our live session. Thank you for being here and getting this done.